So I'm gonna try and do the like a simplified version so I could fit all three. You have a little bit more space, so you can go a little bit bigger in your painting, right? There are a couple of ways you can go about it. I'll start with a red apple right here. You can, obviously you're gonna draw it out real quick. I don't need to draw it because I can start painting it right away. You can go a couple of ways about it. Do initial painting, wet and wet, with, you see a little bit like it looks like the red apple has a little bit of the stripes in there, right? And so when it has a little bit of the stripes, little design on it, you can fill in your red apple with like one value first, add in those stripes wet and wet, so they're a little more contrasting, and then paint all the rest of the light and shadow in a little bit later. See? So you can also do another way to where you first focus on painting, add a few of the stripes where you want them at the end. They not need to be totally wet and wet, only if you want to, right? But let's do it the wet and wet version first. So I will go ahead and establish like the shape of my apple. And I have like plenty of water mixed with my paint here. I'm going to leave this little bit here for that yellowish part where the stem comes out. And I'm gonna keep wetting it. So did you see me mix the colors? Can you guess which colors I'm using to get this value and this color?
The rose and the other reddish color?
The rose and a little bit of cadmium yellow. Okay? So lots of rose though, but the value has now changed to be more on the bright yellower red, right? Not so rosy. All right, so here we go. Basically, that's the shape. Now I would like to add a little bit of that very mild bright spot where the light reflects, but it's not totally white. So I'm just adding water to it while it still is kind of wet, right? Just water, no, not even yellow in there. I will, when I like wash it out enough, I'll go and now add just a little yellow tint to it, just a little warmth. Okay, so that's my highlight. I will now go ahead and do darker stripes. So it's soaking in nicely by the time I get my darker red. So I'm getting, with a thinner brush, right, I'm getting my red without yellow now, very thick, very little water, and a little bit of Indian red to it. And I'm going to like, which way am I going to go? Well, there's going to be a stem, stripe / shadow from the stem. Then there's going to be like a little stripy kind of designs. They're not very even. They are kind of irregular, right? But they kind of follow the curvature of the apple. So as much as you can, go ahead and capture that curvature. Here, see, it's already drying up, so it's looking more sharp. And here it's not so dry yet, which is fine. And at this point, you don't need to worry too much about how you're getting the stripes in, super precise, not super precise. It's once you start painting other layers over, they're gonna get much more mild. The main thing is to tell the eye that something is going on. It's not totally just smooth, it's not just one red, there are other colors, and they're changing in a kind of stripy, irregular design, okay? So this is enough for now. Remember, Sophia, don't worry about whether it's super precise, right? Not at this point.
The dot.
Yeah, see, there is a little bit of a drip. I'm gonna just let it stay for now. I'm just gonna like soak it up. It's still like distorting the shape of my apple on the bottom, but I'm not gonna worry about it right now, okay? I'm not worried because the shadow underneath is gonna be very dark. And you can easily cover it over and it will help you make that shadow darker because you already have your first color and value, already darkness in there. It's gonna get even darker, so that's not something you need to worry about it. So now I'm gonna pick up some of my slightly greenish yellow. I have some yellow and some green left from the last demo, from the leaves. So I'm gonna go ahead and just fill this up with that color. Even though it's light and some of it's not as light, I'll just fill it in right now like this. See, the edge is kind of cut out, but then when I look at that apple, it does look a little sharp, right? It's not very smooth. Like the real apples, like the ones I brought there, they do have a little more smooth transition, right? But in this case, we're just looking at that and we're trying to recreate it. Don't worry about like all the fine details. You don't need to worry about it now. All right, so it's drying up really well. It still is wet here, so since I can't work on establishing the shadows in the apple, I'm gonna work on making the background and the table. The background, we have mostly that darker table. That's easy. You start with Indian red. It's the closest to the darkness and the color. And then you kind of look at it and you go, how can I make that a little bit more rich? So it's not as simplistic. I'll add a little rose and I'll add a little bit of my Indian yellow. And I will just start with that first. Now, from my angle of observation, and those of you who are standing, the table, the darkness of the table comes all the way around the table, and that lighter board is up right here. If you're sitting down, lower eye level, the lighter board will be somewhere through the middle. See? So, but from my angle of observation, I am only worried about what I'm painting, right? You worry about your angle of observation and what you're painting. So I'm gonna go around the apple. I'm trying to not overlap it over where I painted the apple, but if it overlaps a little bit, no big deal. That's a nice color. I like the color. It's not simplistic. It could be darker, but that's my first pass so far, right? So I'll go more or less carefully around here. See how the big thick brush is very helpful? Again, so you're paying attention to how the color changes, the values change. The apple, over here, the apple is definitely lighter and the background is definitely darker. So definitely here we'll have to dump more and more layers of paint. But on the other side here, we have to be a bit more careful. This is almost dry here, but not quite. So on the other side, now the apple gets really dark and the table starts to look lighter. So while it's still wet, I am more confident in dumping more paint right in here. And you see how it piled up in here because of that little dip? That's a good thing. It helps us see that it's darker, right? Even though the darkness doesn't spread all over, it's totally fine, no problem. Right here, it still is darker than the apple, so far we're keeping that. As it gets down, that's where the apple starts to get darker, the table starts to get lighter, so I probably should stop dumping more paint, and also the shadow from the pear is starting to come close in here. So that's fine. I'm gonna keep that for now, and I'm just gonna connect this, and finish it off sort of flat like that. My shadow from the pear definitely will come in here later on. So while this is still kind of wet, I guess I can make the shadow a little more pronounced. I'll grab some of the blue. I will get it to the same mixtures I have, the Indian red with a little bit of rose And now I'm not adding any more of the yellow to it because the shadow doesn't have so much yellow. And I'm just looking where does that darkness start. And even if it's still a bit wet and the edges become very mild, that's good. That's good for me. All right, yeah. So here's the shadow starting to shape up. Mm-hmm. I also see that definitely this transition is shaping up too sharp, and it is not sharp over there. It's very mild. So I'll come in here right now and lighten it. And this can use another layer anyways. It's drying up, becoming too light, and there, I just smoothed it out, so it's not so strong. This is kind of sagging here. All right, so then I'll go ahead and come in here with my lighter one. The same color as I used for the table, I'm just gonna add more in here. Soften up this transition, because I didn't mean for it to droop so much. Get a little more yellow in here to indicate a little stronger, warmer light. And it's kind of messy, but I'll leave it like this because it's just your first pass. You're just first passing. Once it dries up, we'll still go darker with the shadow. But now everything within the apple is starting to get dry, so we can now establish the apple shadow. Now you need to be clever with what shadow of the apple color you can choose. It's red, but it's also darker red, and it's not super red, it's shadowy. So let's try a little rose and a little bit of your Indian red to maintain the reddishness, but also get it a little darker. So I will get a little bit of my Windsor blue in here, but not so much that it stays too purpley, okay, because the shadows, it's cooler, slightly leaning toward purpley, but not too purpley. So for example, here's what I mixed. See, somewhat purpley. Once it goes over this color, it will start to get, the whole apple will start to get darker, but it will also be a slightly different color. See, not the same as that. So I'm looking like playing, where am I seeing the darker areas? Kind of like this. Near the edge, it stays a bit lighter, except for closer to this area. That's where the apple is darker than the background. Then it becomes lighter again, and the whole shadow kind of wraps underneath here and kind of comes to this edge. And this is, remember, this is where I said the table was once again lighter than the apple. And now I'm making this also darker, but just not quite as dark, not as strongly contrasting as that area. And I'm gonna give this a little bit of darkness. So it's the same brush, same color on my brush. I'm just diluting it a bit. Softening up the edges, softening up a little bit in the back so that the lighter area stays right in here, right? Softening this up. And if you go over this once again a little bit, it's kind of soaked in. You kind of add a little bit more to it, darken it. Okay, and so now it's starting to separate into more of a light and shadow, right? I'm still seeing that this is still a bit too strong. It's not really that brightly red. It could be a bit darker. So get a little bit more into it. All right, where else do we see a little bit of the darkness? A little shadow from the stem, kind of similar, darker color, value, and a little bit more like darker here, wrapping around, but not by a whole lot. Not a whole lot darker. And as it starts wrapping away toward the middle, for example, on this side, it starts to get a bit darker, but again, not so much. So more water, same color, more water. So more water means your darker color gets diluted. You keep it where you need it. You don't keep it where you don't need it. All right, so more or less we've separated it. Again, let's let this dry. Let's come in here and punch up our table. Punch up, make it a little more. It can use another pass because it's really, even in the sunlight or in the lamplight here in the light, it's not as light. So I'm giving it another pass with value. I'm gonna pick up, I still have this color left in here. I'm still gonna come back and give another pass with value here, darken it, just because we need it darker. Now I'm gonna darken less over here. I'm not gonna push it too far yet. And I'm gonna look on this side. Okay, the darker color continues here, darker background of the table. And it lightens up in here, but not this light. So I'm gonna pass over that. And if you bring it right into your shadow, it's just only helping your shadow to soften up that edge and become dark. And now I'm picking up your darker shadow color that I already mixed. And now I'm gonna go over here and add a little more carefully here, like that. The fact that this drips a little bit, no big deal. Now, do you see how the dynamic is shaping up? You have to pay attention to every time you go, this is lighter, what's in back of it, darker. Mm-hmm. If this becomes lighter, what's next to it in the apple, darker, right? You're always looking for that contrast. That's what makes it look more three-dimensional. So while this is all drying, I'm going to mix a little bit of the shadow within this yellow portion, because the brightest part is actually right next to the shadow. Away from the shadow and closer to the depth, it's starting to get darker. So here we go, sort of like olive color, usually looks more like a shadow on something that's yellow. That's also the first pass, so I'll keep it for now. You see, I'm not even worrying about the stem. Mm-hmm. At this point, the stem is not important, it goes in at the end. The little drips that happen in watercolor painting is actually not bad. They can become quite charming, especially if they're in the less strategic places. Mm-hmm. So if it's happening, don't worry about it. In our art school, they actually encourage you to have this beautiful messiness to your still life painting. It shows you that you're like not afraid, you're going freely, you're experimenting and all. So, all right, so what can we do now? Within the apple, right here, for example, it's fairly dry. Obviously, we only have like very bright, medium, dark, right? So we can still make it a little bit darker here. So I'll pick up more of the same paint that I already used to start with the apple. And I'm going to go and get it in here, but I'm going to stay away from my brightest spot, from where the highlight is, from the light. Okay, I got that in. I'll go over this as well. Because if I do that, all the other values are starting to get a little tuned down, and this becomes more and more three-dimensional as if it's coming closer to us. So here we go, everything else got darker. I'll add a little more darkness to here. Here we go. So once that dries, see, it's such a thin layer, you don't even see much of a transition, right, between the previous lighter one and the next one. Meanwhile, our depth is slowly appearing. So I'm seeing that the top here is dry, and one of the tricks of the trade to show depth and also pick up on the value, the darker value that goes into the darker depth of your space, is to add a little more of the bluer value to it. So I'm taking the same colors I have here, adding more blue to it. And now I'm going to cool this off. Now it's not going to be so reddish brown. Once again, it's becoming more rich in the kind of color it is. So here we go. It's not that strong of a value change because I have a lot of water on my brush, but because of the previous layer of colors, and because it's blue, the change becomes drastic. And I'm going to stay away from this edge even. I'm not going to touch that. And I'm going to do the same thing here to where it's slowly becoming lighter. A lot of it is staying lighter because I have those previous layers. And bring it under. So the main thing is nuances, right? This is to darken and sharpen this transition, the darkest portion under the apple, and the rest of this shadow is not quite so dark. So it's becoming sharper and sharper, right? Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to soften up this transition because I don't want that to pop out too much. And I will add another value to my table. But in this case, I will stay within the Indian red and yellow. I won't touch the edge. I want to add more value to it. So it's darker, but I want it to stay considerably warmer. See how it's starting to change darker, but warmer, cooler, and darker, right? But this is still staying lighter. Oh, that still dripped in here. Okay. I guess it's just going to do that, and that's it. Okay. All right. So your apple doesn't look so simplistic. Warmer, redder, purplier, browner shadows. We want to add a little bit more liveliness to it. Well, first it's sitting on quite a bit darker, sort of reddish-brown table, and the reddish-brown table affects the color of the shadow, making it a little browner, but not quite as brown as the table itself. So like, for example, right here, it's because there's a pear close by and the table is close by, the shadow becomes a bit darker and more brownish. You see how I'm not bringing the shadow right to this shadow, right? Because there is kind of a reflection in there. A little bit of light reflecting from the table. And once again, I'm going to come in here and add another layer, darken this, and kind of combine it with this shadow. So again, brightest, more red, darker red, working toward that total darkness of the shadow of the apple. So while it's still wet, I will add a little more transitional kind of red, where it's starting to get darker, and I'll go over the shadow once again. And now I'm actually not afraid to do more of this, just lines, because of the stripes on the apple. And I don't want my whole shadow to be totally solid. One color, solid, and so on. So now I'm going to darken this a bit, but not as dark as the remaining shadow, because some parts of the shadow are the darkest and others are a little lighter. And again, so it doesn't look too all uniform and the same, I'm going to create a brown that has a little bit of green in it. So it just has a slightly different hue. And where can we throw that little greener but on the side of the yellow pear, right here. Different hue to this redness because the pear is affecting the color of the apple being so close. Come on, it's not showing too green. All right, that's just a little bit, little addition in there, change in colors. Let's give that back a little bit more of a pass of a slightly darker value because it's curving away toward that darker background, right? It's curving away toward the darker background, but it's also curving away from light. And we can give another pass to this to make it look like it's also coming out of the deeper part of the apple. And let's deepen this as well. So they're all combining. So there it is. Everything's combining. All the shadows are combining. On the other side of the apple right here, if you look at this very thin reflection, you will see that it's kind of cool and very much like on the edge. Kind of sharp almost. And what do you think is causing this?
Maybe from the window reflection?
Yeah, because it's cool.
Yeah.
It's almost like if you look very closely and compare it to the warmth of this, it seems almost as if it's like bluish, like bluish gray. So that's fine, it's all good because we want as much color in our reflections and all of this as possible. So now that I kind of wiped it off, right? I cleared the paint a little bit, established that shape. I'm gonna literally just pick up a little bit of my Winsor blue and very carefully just add it in here and give it this cooler feel. And if it's blending too much, we can wait for it to dry more. While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and work on the sharpening up my shadow in this area because this is starting to get darker right in here. This stays darkest and this here stays darkest. So again, a little bit more blue, a bit more of your Indian red. And where is absolute darkest? But right here. Mm-hmm. Absolutely the darkest spot that I'm seeing right in here. And then it starts to become redder, juicier, less dark, and less dark over here. Okay, so to make this apple even more round, I can add more values of my red over here and over here. See what I'm doing? I'm going over the apple and the background at the same time. And what it creates is it softens up that edge. And that apple disappears into the background on that side more, right? And that's what we need. We do need it to kind of go away from us. And to get it to go away from us and hide in that background is softening up that edge. Now right here, the edge is not softening up. Here, the reflection is cool and kind of almost sharp. Even though it's not super sharp, it's almost sharp. So that's where I will also keep it a bit more pronounced. Soften this up. Now soften this up, and the drips came in. Okay. It's not totally bad. We can make it work for us. All right, so what can we do now? Add the stem. I'll just take the same color I already mixed. Totally reuse the colors you already have. For example, for the shadow here, I will take that same very dark, kind of brownish, cooler color, and I'll add my stem through the center. It's kind of going like this. It's kind of becoming wider here. It has like a lighter portion on it, but most of the stem looks kind of dark. So because it's now starting to be like very, very tiny little thing, no big deal. Here I'll just wipe a little bit where it's sort of light on the stem. The rest is dark. Okay, the only thing I will add is continuation of this shadow that goes right in here from the stem, right? Next to it is bright light. Here's the shadow from the stem, continues. Here's the darkest spot, and the shadow on the apple from the stem on the red also needs to be slightly darker. Okay, so the reflection is actually not bad. It dripped a little bit, so I'll come in here and just make it a little stronger like that. What else can we improve? We can make sure that this edge is a little more rounded, so the apple is not super wobbly on the edges. Give it more color. But it's, even though it's reflective light, it's not as strong as the main direct reflective light, right? So what else can we do? Make this a little neater. You could leave it like that. This is not the objective of this exercise. The main thing is get yourself used to seeing the color, the value, the transitions, and curvatures, light shadow, the color in the reflections. It doesn't look all the same. I'm just picking up a little bit of this so it's not too even and cut out. This here gets a little bit darker as well, right on the edge. Transitional, not too dark right away. See how this looks very cool compared to the rest of it? Yeah. And you can even make it a little bit more pronounced. If you are emphasizing the colors more than what you see in reality, it's good. It's especially good to overemphasize them in the beginning to get used to seeing those colors. If something looks a little bit bluer, go ahead and make it more blue. Something looks a little greener, go ahead, push that to look more green, and so on. It's good for you to train your eye to see all of those transitions. So I'm sharpening it once again. It's already bluer, cooler toward under the apple. It's already lighter toward here. I'll just leave it like that. And the only other thing I can do is to continue add slightly darker to the background. At one point, you do have to decide just where you're going to stop, when enough is going to be enough. But you see, if I'm adding more and it looks better, right? Where are you going? And the apple looks more like the light is definitely shining on it very strongly, then that's a good thing. There we go. So, how does it look from the distance? Not too bad. The quick study, you can just stop at this kind of stage, all right? It doesn't have to be super, super detailed. This is not about detail. Do you want to get started? Do your own apple? Then when you're ready for a pear, I'll do a pear.
Okay.